All right, everybody, has the Bitcoin price here broken the parabolic move here to the downside? And are we looking here for a major bear market? Well, if I go on X, most people are actually saying here that the Bitcoin price is going to move to the downside. People are extremely fearful, as you can see here on the fear and greed index. It is extremely low. But in this video, I'm going to be talking here about why I think the bear market probably isn't over, but why this chart really doesn't look that clean as well. And there are some cases here to be made for the bears, but we're just going to dive here straight into it and just going to look at it very, very closely and see what's really going to be going on. Well, what we can basically see here is this is kind of a clear chart here. If I go here, look here at the funding rate. So this is the funding rate indicator. It's on my website as well if you want to check it out. But you can see over here is that here at the all-time high, we had extremely positive funding rate here in 2017. Around this all-time high, again, you can see extremely positive funding rate. And currently we are in the negative funding rate territory. And we haven't seen any kind of big positive funding rate spikes. And I would say that overall, in this entire Bitcoin bull run, because I would say it's a bull run, I kind of feel like people are really not as hyped as I've seen in the past. So, for example, in the previous bull runs, I would see the Bitcoin price being talked about on the news. You know, you had your taxi driver talk about Bitcoin, your dog talk about Bitcoin, but we're not seeing any of that. We're not seeing that funding rate here that like we've seen here in the past. But we've still actually broken here this parabolic move here to the upside. And what it actually seems like is that this could potentially be the start here of a bear market. But what is, again, very, very weird is that we are really not seeing the type of speculative price bubble like we've seen in the past and these previous bull runs where everybody was talking about Bitcoin, everyone was buying Bitcoin. And so that is a little bit weird. Now, one of the conclusions I have is that I think currently most of the Bitcoin run is actually driven here by institutional investors, by ETFs, by maybe countries. I think that the retail investors, they've just kind of stopped being interested in Bitcoin. I think they're finding other ways to invest, maybe on meme coins like Blofin. Those things tended to kind of blow up a lot. And I think maybe a lot of people just blew up their money on these kind of altcoins. You also see these betting platforms where you like make certain predictions. They are also really blowing up. And I think a lot of retail is really not that interested anymore in Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin for them it's already kind of expensive and it's like a high price. And I think that kind of the real values of Bitcoin being that it is a currency that can't be inflated and it's a way to fight against the central banks. I could think currently, because the central banks are really not printing a lot of money, I think people have kind of forgotten about it. And I think Bitcoin has kind of moved a little bit to the background. Also, we have to think about AI and, consider all these things here together. I think that it's probably the reason why this Bitcoin bull run is not as excited as we've seen in the past, and also could explain here why we're really not seeing that crazy retail type of speculative price action that we've seen here in the past here around the potential all-time high. So if we're going to break it to the downside, that means the all-time high is going to be at $126,000, which is going to be barely here above the previous all-time high, which is going to be very, very bad. I would still say the Bitcoin price will probably still recover eventually after a couple years and move to the upside. But I think then you can kind of conclude that the returns just haven't been as exciting as we were probably expecting here. Now, the thing is, though, is that Bitcoin is still a hedge here against central banks. We still know that central banks eventually will start printing money again. So there's going to be a moment for Bitcoin to shine. But maybe overall here, all of the AI stuff, the pump fund stuff, the meme coins have just kind of drawn away a lot of attention from Bitcoin. And that kind of made this bull run a little bit boring. That is potentially a reason that you can say. Another reason, the more bullish reason, why we're breaking here to the downside is that actually this bull run, because it's being driven by, not speculative retail, but it's actually driven by retail and by actually like institutional investors, you can actually draw the conclusion here that this cycle is probably going to be a lot different here than the previous cycles. And maybe we're just going to see something like this. We're going to see a much longer cycle where we're just eventually going to move it to these higher levels and still get a speculative bubble, but kind of see that the time frames are just not really going to line up with the other previous all-time highs here, because we don't have retail as much anymore here in this space. Maybe it's just going to be kind of like a slower grind to the upside rather than an explosive move. In my opinion, it's very unlikely that we're going to go back here, I'd say, to about $60,000, anything like that, or well, this is really going to be a bear market, something like $50,000 to $40,000. It's going to be extremely unlikely, especially with gold being at an all-time high, AI is doing so well. To me, I don't really see how this is going to, again, start a bear market. Also, you look at the funding rate, you look at the fact that people are extremely fearful. It's just not the type of price action you would generally see around an all-time high. So what I would most likely just say, just from my own opinion, I think that this cycle is just going to be different. And I think that it might be taking more time here for us to reach some higher levels and kind of see an explosive move like that to the upside. I also think that the investing kind of environment has really changed here. Again, it has shifted a lot to kind of short-term gambling on prediction websites, pump fun. It's all about short-term gains. And also, if you look at AI, for example, people are extremely hyped about AI. Gold also is kind of stealing the narrative. I think that the environment for Bitcoin has kind of changed, and I think that's one of the reasons here why people are really not that interested into it. But as you guys know here on Team Underground, we always have cool and exciting information that can kind of show you here is that no, Bitcoin isn't dead yet, and it's just going to take time to shine here, and it's still probably going to be one of the best bets out there. So I have this tweet here from a guy here where you see this is a guy here that bought in the 1970s here this apartment in New York, and he has like this art studio right there. You guys know how expensive New York real estate is. I mean, look at how big this building. So this guy bought this for 2 yearly incomes. So he bought it about for like $30,000 here back in the 1970s. And you can see he has this massive house. He lives in it. It's probably worth like, I don't know, a couple million right now easily. Absolutely easily here. So that is the kind of thing you have to understand is that like when you're buying Bitcoin, you're buying in a sense real estate like it was in the 1970s or maybe even earlier, maybe in the 1920s. You're buying real estate in a major city basically decades and decades ago. That's kind of what I would say is kind of similar to Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is going to go through these stages where it's probably not going to do a lot for a couple of years. Maybe it's not going to do a lot for a decade. Like in gold, famously, it didn't really do a lot after like 2011, went sideways for basically 10 years. And now it's exploding to the upside. Is that if you're just going to hold Bitcoin long term, I think you're going to do extremely well. I think if you're just going to use it as a retirement account, you're going to hold it for a couple of decades. I think you're going to, if you have one Bitcoin, it's going to be the equivalent of basically buying an apartment like this here. Now, if you have a lot of Bitcoin, I don't think you need to wait that long. I think then it's just going to be, again, you're just going to wait a decade, and this thing is anyway going to outperform inflation. But I do, again, want to show you guys here is that basically Bitcoin is not, it's not really an asset like a stock that's based here on company value. It's really just in a sense buying real estate. It's buying real estate in an asset that can't be inflated. It's the only asset in the world that can't be inflated. And I think if you're just going to hold it in there, again, the returns are going to stack up over the years. And that's why I think the short-term price action, that even if this cycle fails, it isn't going to change the fact that the government is going to stop printing money. It isn't going to change the fact that Bitcoin is still, in my opinion, a very, very nice and amazing investment here. And it's going to change the fact here that if you want to buy an apartment in New York, it's way too expensive. If you're going to buy AI companies, it's way too expensive. Stocks are extremely overvalued as well. What other ways you have to do to play the game is, I think, going into Bitcoin. Because that's the only asset here that's still relatively cheap. So moving forward into the next thing, this is this weird thing I've seen here about, so this coin called Zcash is currently doing extremely well. And you can see this is altcoin doing extremely well. Go to a regular chart, you can see, boom, blew up to the upside. But people don't really know even what this is. But basically, this is the founder of Zcash, which appears to be also transgender, saying that Zcash initial setup requires trust in people. So basically, Zcash is a privacy coin, but to set up something like Zcash, it requires basically the people that actually set it up to be able to trust each other and destroy a certain part of the private key. Which means if one of them didn't do that, then basically they can just print an unlimited amount of Zcash and nobody would really know that it even is possible because it's privacy coin. That's basically what I've made up here. So there is a chance, it's not a zero, but there is definitely a chance that Zcash is compromised and people wouldn't really be able to know it. And so that's why Bitcoin is the only one that's actually open source. It doesn't require any trust, but with all of these coins, it actually does require. And people think that this is going to be the new Bitcoin, but it isn't going to be the world reserve currency if it's going to rely on trust, because we don't know if it's actually compromised at all. So anyway, that's here the founder here speaking about this here. And that's the thing with the altcoins, they all require trust. They're not all like Bitcoin, and that's really sad. Why we see things like Pump Fund, we see things like Ripple or Dogecoin, all of these kind of centralized coins. I think then they're not going to be worth a lot. If you're just going to hold Bitcoin and you're just going to wait a couple decades, I think each coin is going to be worth a couple million easily if the central banks are just going to keep printing money. I think that's just the way to play it. And in terms of the short-term price action, we're just going to wait. I'm basically going to go back to trading and then just see what's going to happen. But yeah, I think for the longer term, and I think if you're worried here, and that's kind of the conclusion here, that if you're worried about extreme fear, and let's say this cycle has ended, I mean, we don't really know, but is that really going to change Bitcoin's fundamentals? No. It's going to change that central banks are not going to print money? No. And the moment central banks are going to start printing money, you know, you have a very limited amount of time to get back into Bitcoin and be able to buy it. So I think regardless of what is going to happen, and my strategy has always been, I'm just going to hold it. I'm going to hold it for multiple years. I've continued to do so. I'm a multimillionaire. If I just hold it for another few decades, I'm going to be maybe going to be worth like much more millions. So it's going to be to my kids, going to go to my family, and that's the strategy moving forward. And whatever is going to happen this cycle, we don't really have to care. If it's going to go down, we can trade it. If it goes up, we can trade it. Let's just wait. Let's just see. But the fact that again we have this negative funding rate, and generally speaking here, negative funding rate, big fear, not seeing the general kind of hype we've seen in the past, I think that this cycle is just going to be more of a long-term cycle, and we're just going to wait for this thing to play out. So anyway, just keep an eye out again on the central banks. If we're going to start printing money as well, this thing is going to go flying, and AI is kind of stealing the show, gold is kind of stealing the show, but I really don't think that's going to change everything fundamentally for Bitcoin. So we're just going to have to wait. So with that, I want to end this video. Hope to see you guys here in my next video. Bye-bye.